The night was stormy. Rain slammed against the windows of Crestspoon Medical Center, thunder rolling like a warning from the sky. Inside, the maternity ward was alive with the cries of newborns, the shuffling of nurses, and the low hum of machines. It was supposed to be a night of joy, but for two families, it would become the beginning of a nightmare that would remain hidden for 7 years. Emily Carter, 29, a school teacher, had been waiting for this day for months. The nursery at home was ready, painted blue with tiny clothes neatly folded. Her husband, David, held her hand through contractions, whispering encouragement. Everything seemed perfect. The baby, when he finally arrived, was strong, healthy, a little miracle as the nurses cooed. Not far away, in another delivery room, Rosa Martinez, 22, a young single mother, was giving birth alone. She clutched a small overnight bag with clothes borrowed from a cousin. Exhaustion and fear clouded her mind as she breathed through the final pushes. When her son emerged, he was smaller, fragile, and pale. Not unusual, the doctor said, but enough to set the nurses on alert. At the center of this chaos was Nurse Linda Hawthorne, a senior nurse who had been on the maternity ward for 18 years. Linda was respected, trusted, the kind of nurse no one questioned. But that night, she carried a secret heavier than any hospital chart. Her son, Daniel, had been diagnosed with a serious kidney condition days earlier. Insurance would not cover the expensive treatment, and the hospital had made it clear, without immediate payment, Daniel would not receive the care he needed. Linda's desperation had been building for days. Now, faced with 2 newborns in her care, a reckless thought took root. As the babies were placed in the nursery, Linda moved between bassinets with practiced ease. She glanced at the fragile baby, Rosa's son, and then at the healthy one, Emily's. Her mind raced. In her panic, she told herself she was making a choice for the greater good. The healthier baby should go to the struggling mother, who might provide better care. The weaker baby would go to the wealthy, insured family, whose resources might somehow save her own child. It made no logical sense, but in that moment, it seemed like salvation. Minutes passed, and Linda made her move. With trembling hands, she swapped the ID bracelets. She lifted the babies, placed them in different cribs, and smiled reassuringly at both mothers, masking the storm inside her own heart. The mothers were too exhausted, too trusting, too distracted by the birth and the hospital routine to notice anything unusual. The nurses and doctors on the floor, overworked and short-staffed, never suspected. In that tiny window of chaos, 2 lives were exchanged without consent, and no one knew. When the babies were finally wheeled to their mothers, the differences were subtle. Emily held her newborn, who was slightly smaller than she expected, with darker hair than hers, but she dismissed it. First-time parent nerves, she told herself. Rosa held her son, marveling at his strength and perfect cries, unaware that he was not biologically hers. The nurses cooed and reassured, maintaining the illusion of normalcy. Outside the delivery rooms, the storm raged on, a mirror to the turmoil that had silently taken place within the hospital's walls. Linda's heart pounded, not from excitement, but from fear. She knew what she had done. She knew the risk, and yet she convinced herself it was a choice made out of love for her son. "This will save him," she whispered to herself, even though the truth of the decision was uncertain. The hospital discharged both families without incident. Emily left with her healthy baby, not realizing that over the coming years, subtle differences would haunt her. The baby was often sickly, with weak resistance to minor illnesses. Doctors blamed genetics. Emily blamed herself. Rosa took her son home, who thrived, strong and energetic, but somehow always felt slightly alien to her. The switch would remain invisible, hidden behind the trust that families place in the hands of medical professionals. And Linda? She continued her night shift as if nothing had happened. To the outside world, she was a dedicated nurse, a protector of life. Behind closed doors, she wrestled with guilt and justification. Every time she checked the nursery records, every time she saw the baby's charts, she reminded herself of the desperate reasoning that had guided her actions. Her son's life depended on it. She convinced herself that what she did was right, and in that conviction, she buried a crime so profound it would only be uncovered 7 years later. By morning, the storm had passed. The hospital corridors were quiet again, the only traces of the night's chaos being the cries of newborns and the tired eyes of overworked staff. 2 families had gone home, unaware that their children had been switched, unaware that their lives had been altered forever. And in the nursery, Linda Hawthorne cleaned the cribs with meticulous care, hiding the knowledge of her decision beneath the veneer of professionalism. It was a night of miracles, yes, but also a night of betrayal. One nurse, trusted by the families and the hospital, had made a choice that no one else could have imagined. And though the parents believed they had brought their own children home, fate had other plans. 7 years would pass. 7 years of love, of confusion, of unexplainable questions. Subtle differences in appearance, medical oddities, and the quiet whispers of intuition would haunt both families. But no one would suspect the truth. Not yet. And somewhere in the hospital, Linda Hawthorne continued her work, carrying a secret that would one day unravel everything she had tried to protect. 7 years passed since that stormy night at Crestspoon Medical Center, and life had carried both families forward in ways they could never have imagined. To outsiders, everything seemed ordinary. Emily Carter and David Carter raised their son, whom they had believed was their biological child, with love, devotion, and careful attention. Rosa Martinez nurtured her son with tireless affection, proud of his strength and apparent resilience. But beneath the surface, subtle discrepancies began to whisper hints that something was off. Differences that neither family fully understood and would never question, at least not yet. For Emily, the first hints were small. Her son, Lucas, had a delicate frame and a vulnerability that seemed almost at odds with her own family's robust health history. He caught every minor illness. Colds lingered, fevers spiked, and even minor cuts healed slower than expected. The doctors reassured her repeatedly that children vary widely, especially firstborns, and Emily, exhausted from work and parenting, accepted their explanations. But she would sometimes watch Lucas sleep and feel an unnameable pang, a sense that he was just slightly different. David, too, noticed things, but dismissed them. He chalked it up to Emily's tendency to worry. Yet, over the years, subtle behavioral differences between Lucas and other children began to gnaw at him. Lucas struggled with coordination, had unusual food allergies, and his features seemed slightly different from both Emily and David's family resemblance. Still, it was easy to rationalize. Nature varies, after all, and as Lucas thrived academically and emotionally, the oddities were filed away as harmless quirks. Meanwhile, Rosa Martinez's son, Ethan, was the opposite. He was robust, healthy, and usually intelligent for his age. Rosa often marveled at his energy, his appetite, and his seemingly boundless immunity to sickness. He bore some features that reminded her of distant relatives, yet certain traits, the shape of his eyes, the curl of his hair, never quite aligned with her own. Still, she dismissed it. A child could inherit genes unpredictably, she told herself, and so she carried on, unaware that her perfect baby was not biologically hers. Linda Hawthorne continued her life as well, now seasoned by years of working with children and mothers at Crestspoon Medical Center. Outwardly, she maintained her professionalism, earning respect from both colleagues and parents, but inside, the secret she carried was a living weight. Every time she saw Lucas or Ethan, she felt a pang of guilt, yet also relief that her son, Daniel, had received his treatment in time. The relief, however, was temporary. She knew that secrets like hers had a way of surfacing, no matter how carefully hidden. Over the years, the family's lives began to intersect in small, seemingly coincidental ways. Birthdays, school events, and community functions often brought them into the same circles. Both Lucas and Ethan attended the same local elementary school, though they were in different grades. Teachers sometimes remarked on the uncanny similarities between the boys, noting physical traits or mannerisms that were strikingly alike. Emily would smile politely at such comments, and Rosa would laugh, thinking it was coincidence. The pattern was subtle, but the universe seemed to tease the truth in tiny, persistent ways. As the boys grew older, small medical incidents sparked curiosity in Emily and David. Lucas developed a recurring rash and showed signs of a mild but unusual genetic marker in routine blood tests. Doctors dismissed it as minor, and no further testing was suggested, but a seed of doubt began to form. Emily's mind occasionally drifted back to that night at the hospital, a faint, irrational whisper of unease that she could never fully place.
Rosa, on the other hand, noticed Ethan's exceptional physical resilience and occasional advanced cognitive abilities. Teachers sometimes assumed he had special educational needs or talents, remarking on his early problem-solving skills and unusual empathy. Rosa's pride grew, yet she occasionally caught herself thinking, he is so different from what I expected, yet somehow perfect. The contradiction gnawed at her, but she never pursued it further. Meanwhile, Linda lived in quiet fear. Any hospital procedure or interaction that involved either family was a knife edge of tension. She meticulously avoided assigning herself to cases where Lucas or Ethan might appear. Still, in a small town like theirs, coincidences were inevitable. Occasionally, she glimpsed the boys during school visits or local community events. She felt an uncomfortable mix of guilt and pride. Pride that she had, in her mind, saved her son. Guilt that she had stolen two families' peace. And then, almost imperceptibly, the universe began nudging events toward revelation. A routine school assignment required parental DNA samples for a science project. Emily, eager to participate, agreed to provide her son's DNA. Rosa, similarly involved, gave hers without thought. It was an ordinary decision, innocent and mundane, yet it would be the pebble that started an avalanche. Behind the scenes, unbeknownst to the families, a new hospital policy required periodic DNA verification for certain hereditary conditions. The combination of these tests, along with administrative oversight at Crestspoon Medical Center, set the stage for what would later be discovered. The files, initially mundane and bureaucratic, were quietly reviewed by a young, meticulous lab technician. This technician noticed discrepancies, minor but significant mismatches that hinted at something impossible. Lucas did not match either of his supposed parents. The revelation was not immediate, but it sent ripples through the hospital's administrative system. Confidential consultations, hushed phone calls, and careful document review began to paint a disturbing picture. And all the while, the families remained blissfully unaware, their lives shaped by love and routine, oblivious to the secret that had shadowed them since the day of their children's birth. As the years continued, the narrative of the switched children unfolded silently. The boys grew in parallel, each thriving in their own way, while the invisible thread connecting them remained hidden yet taut with tension. Every school event, every community interaction, every subtle comparison of features and abilities added to the silent pressure building toward inevitable exposure. For Linda Hawthorne, the years were a delicate balance of professional success and internal torment. She had achieved what she believed was necessary. Her son survived, but she lived in constant fear that one day a single test, a single oversight would unravel everything. That day would come, and when it did, the carefully constructed world she had built on a foundation of deception would collapse. 7 years had passed, and the quiet unease had begun to grow, like a shadow stretching across both families' lives. They were unaware that the thread of truth was tightening, preparing to snap. And in the midst of it all, two children continued to grow, healthy, thriving, innocent, completely unaware that the lives they knew were built on a lie that could destroy everything. It began like any ordinary day at Crestspoon Medical Center. Corridors bustling with staff, the smell of antiseptic hanging in the air, and the soft cries of infants echoing from the maternity wing. But for two families, and for one woman in particular, the ordinary was about to shatter. Emily Carter sat in the pediatric office, nervously twisting her wedding ring. Lucas, her 7-year-old son, squirmed slightly in the chair across from her. A recent routine checkup had revealed unusual genetic markers, minor, nothing dangerous, yet enough to trigger a new DNA verification protocol mandated by the hospital for hereditary conditions. The lab requested a simple cheek swab. Emily thought nothing could come of it. At the same time, Rosa Martinez had complied with the same request for her son Ethan. The procedure was ordinary, routine, and trivial, but it would soon become the spark that ignited a devastating revelation. Weeks later, the results arrived. A meticulous lab technician named Clara Nguyen noticed discrepancies in the genetic reports. At first, she assumed a clerical error. Perhaps the samples had been swapped, but the data was clear. Lucas's DNA did not match either of Emily or David. Rose's son Ethan displayed the same pattern, aligning perfectly with Lucas's missing markers. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Something extraordinary had occurred, something that could only be explained by a grave mistake or something deliberate. The hospital administration quietly called an emergency meeting. The chief medical officer, Dr. Harlan Pierce, and several senior staff reviewed the genetic data, cross-referencing birth records, ID logs, and nursery assignments. The records revealed that both boys had been born on the same night in adjacent delivery rooms and placed in the same nursery. The pieces were coming together, each one pointing to a possibility that the staff could hardly believe. Dr. Pierce, his tone taut with tension, said, "We need to investigate this immediately. Every record, every nurse on duty that night, every ID bracelet and chart, nothing can be overlooked." The investigation quickly focused on one person, Nurse Linda Hawthorne. Her credentials, seniority, and position in the nursery made her the only staff member with access to both infants during the critical window. Though she had an unblemished record, the circumstantial evidence was compelling. Linda, at home that evening, sensed a quiet unease she could not explain. She had always believed her secret was safe, buried beneath years of routine, trust, and professional respect. But deep down, she knew the walls she had built around her deception were beginning to crumble. Detective Aaron Cole, a seasoned investigator, was brought in. He began his work quietly, speaking to lab technicians, reviewing hospital logs, and examining security footage. Every step revealed the impossibility of coincidence. His attention soon focused on Linda Hawthorne. Her presence on the floor the night of the births, her access to both cribs, and the timing of her shifts formed a clear pattern. When Detective Cole first approached Linda at her apartment, she smiled politely, masking the storm inside. "Detective Cole," she said, voice steady, "how can I help you?" But inside, her heart raced. The first step toward discovery had arrived. Detective Cole presented the genetic findings in preliminary investigation. "Linda," he said gently but firmly, "these results are troubling. Can you explain why Lucas and Ethan's DNA do not match their supposed parents?" Linda's mind spun. Years of careful concealment, of professional respect, of silent guilt crashed down in an instant. Denial was fragile and fleeting. Her hand trembled as she clasped it over her chest, trying to steady her breathing. I don't understand," she said, even though she knew it was already too late. Over the next few hours, evidence mounted. Security footage from the nursery, though grainy, confirmed her presence near both cribs at critical times. Hospital logs, ID bracelet assignments, and staff statements painted a consistent picture. Detective Cole presented it methodically. "Linda, we know what happened that night. You switched the babies. We need the truth, now." Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of her actions crashed over her. She had rationalized, justified, and convinced herself that she was saving her son. Now all that reasoning felt hollow. Her hand trembled as she clasped it over her chest, trying to steady her breathing. I don't understand," she said, even though she knew it was already too late. Over the next few hours, evidence mounted. Security footage from the nursery, though grainy, confirmed her presence near both cribs at critical times. Hospital logs, ID bracelet assignments, and staff statements painted a consistent picture. Detective Cole presented it methodically. "Linda, we know what happened that night. You switched the babies. We need the truth, now." Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of her actions crashed over her. She had rationalized, justified, and convinced herself that she was saving her son. Now all that reasoning felt hollow. Her hand trembled as she clasped it over her chest, trying to steady her breathing. I don't understand," she said, even though she knew it was already too late. Over the next few hours, evidence mounted. Security footage from the nursery, though grainy, confirmed her presence near both cribs at critical times. Hospital logs, ID bracelet assignments, and staff statements painted a consistent picture. Detective Cole presented it methodically. "Linda, we know what happened that night. You switched the babies. We need the truth, now."
Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of her actions crashed over her. She had rationalized, justified, and convinced herself that she was saving her son. Now all that reasoning felt hollow. Her hand trembled as she clasped it over her chest, trying to steady her breathing. I don't understand, she said, even though she knew it was already too late. Over the next few hours, evidence mounted. Security footage from the nursery, though grainy, confirmed her presence near both cribs at critical times. Hospital logs, ID bracelet assignments, and staff statements painted a consistent picture. Detective Cole presented it methodically. Linda, we know what happened that night. You switched the babies. We need the truth, now. Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of her actions crashed over her. She had rationalized, justified, and convinced herself that she was saving her son. Now all that reasoning felt hollow. Her hand trembled as she clasped it over her chest, trying to steady her breathing. I don't understand, she said, even though she knew it was already too late. Over the next few hours, evidence mounted. Security footage from the nursery, though grainy, confirmed her presence near both cribs at critical times. Hospital logs, ID bracelet assignments, and staff statements painted a consistent picture. Detective Cole presented it methodically. Linda, we know what happened that night. You switched the babies. We need the truth, now. Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of her actions crashed over her. She had rationalized, justified, and convinced herself that she was saving her son. Now all that reasoning felt hollow. Her voice broke as she admitted the truth. I did it, she whispered. I thought it was the only way to save Daniel. I didn't think anyone would ever find out. The confession rippled through the hospital and reached the families. Emily and David were first to be notified, followed by Rosa. The realization that the children they had raised as their own were not biologically theirs was like a blow to the chest. Emotions erupted: disbelief, anger, grief, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Yet within the fury, there was also an acknowledgement of Linda's desperation, the tragic motive behind her actions. The media quickly caught wind of the story. Headlines screamed, "Crestspoon Medical Center baby switch. Nurse confesses after 7 years." Public opinion was divided. Some condemned Linda as a manipulator of innocent lives. Others saw her as a desperate mother driven to catastrophe. Both families faced the daunting task of reconciling their love for the children they had raised with the truth of the switch. Emily and David struggled to understand their attachment to Lucas alongside the knowledge that he was not biologically theirs. Rosa wrestled with the realization that Ethan, the healthy child she adored, belonged to another family. Counseling sessions, therapy, and private discussions became necessary as they attempted to process the truth. Meanwhile, Linda Hawthorne remained in police custody. The evidence against her was overwhelming, yet in her moments of solitude, she reflected not on the crime itself, but on the desperate chain of events that had led to that fateful night. Her son, Daniel, had survived, healthy and thriving, but at a cost so immense that no law could ever fully measure it. The storm that began 7 years ago at Crestspoon Medical Center had finally broken. In its wake, the hospital corridors were quiet, the families shattered, and Linda Hawthorne sat alone, the weight of her choices pressing on her chest. Nothing would ever be the same. The courtroom was tense, the kind of heavy silence that presses against your chest. Media cameras lined the hall outside, recording every moment, while inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and anticipation. 7 years of secrets, lies, and quiet suffering had led to this day. Linda Hawthorne sat in the defendant's chair, hands folded, her face pale. The weight of her actions had aged her beyond her years. 7 years of living with the secret, 7 years of rationalizing a crime she had convinced herself was necessary, had all led to this courtroom moment. She glanced briefly at her attorney, who gave her a solemn nod. There would be no hiding now. Across the room, the families watched, their children beside them. Emily Carter held Lucas close, struggling to reconcile her love for the boy with the truth of his origin.
David Carter's hands were clenched into fists, the tension clear in every movement. Rosa Martinez sat with Ethan, her posture rigid, eyes flicking between Linda and the legal proceedings. The children themselves seemed unaware of the storm around them, but the adults' emotions were heavy enough for all. The prosecution laid out its case with precision. Detective Aaron Cole testified first, recounting the investigation from the DNA discovery to the security footage. He described how the hospital logs and nursery records pointed unambiguously to Linda Hawthorne. The courtroom hung on his every word, absorbing the shock of the revelation. Then came the medical experts. Geneticists explained the DNA evidence in terms everyone could understand. "There is no ambiguity," one doctor said. "Bauk, Ethan, and Lucas are not biologically related to the parents who raised them. The probability of this being an accidental match is effectively zero." Gasps echoed through the room. Finally, the defense rose. Linda's attorney spoke quietly but forcefully, emphasizing her client's motive, the desperate fear for her own son's life, the overwhelming pressure of the hospital system, and the absence of malicious intent toward either child. "Linda Hawthorne acted out of fear," the attorney said. "She made a tragic mistake, but it was a mistake born of love, not greed or malice." The jury listened intently, and the room seemed to hold its breath as Linda herself took the stand. Her voice trembled as she recounted that stormy night at Crestspoon Medical Center, explaining the fear that had driven her actions and the years of guilt that had followed. Tears streaked her face. "I wanted to save my son. I thought I had no other choice. I never imagined it would hurt anyone this way. I am sorry. So sorry." The judge leaned forward, his expression stern yet compassionate. "Your actions," he said, "have caused profound harm. 2 families have had their lives upended, and 2 children have been denied the certainty of their own identities. Yet your motive was not for profit or malice, but for the life of your own child. The court must weigh justice against the tragic circumstances." After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Guilty on all counts: child endangerment, falsifying medical records, and professional misconduct. The room was silent as the judge prepared to deliver the sentence. "Linda Hawthorne," his voice echoing in the chamber, "your actions, while tragically motivated, were deliberate. The trust placed in you as a nurse was violated, and the consequences of your choices have been profound. This court must uphold the law and also recognize the mitigating circumstances of your motive." He paused, allowing the words to settle. "You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 15 years. Your license to practice nursing is permanently revoked." Linda closed her eyes, the words washing over her. Relief mingled with despair. Her son was alive, but she would now spend decades away from him, away from the families she had affected, away from any normal life. Outside the courtroom, the families tried to process their own emotions. Emily Carter hugged Lucas tightly, feeling the warmth of the boy she had raised, yet haunted by the knowledge that he was not biologically hers. "You are my son," she whispered. "Nothing will ever change that." David nodded, tears glistening, understanding that love did not always align with biology. Rosa Martinez faced Ethan, her pride in his strength and intelligence unchanged, yet shadowed by the truth. She took his hand and said softly, "You are loved no matter what. That will never change." The children, unaware of the depth of the drama, smiled innocently, their lives now poised on the cusp of a new reality. Meanwhile, Detective Cole reflected on the case with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but the human cost was enormous. The story of Crestspoon Medical Center would be remembered as both a cautionary tale and a tragedy, a reminder of the weight of desperation and the consequences of choices made in fear. In prison, Linda Hawthorne began the slow process of reckoning. Days and nights blurred together, each moment a reminder of the life she had disrupted and the son she had saved. Therapy, reflection, and letters from her son would become her lifeline. She would spend her sentence carrying both the burden and the bittersweet comfort that Daniel was alive. For the families, life slowly resumed its rhythms. Holidays, birthdays, and school milestones continued, now tinged with the awareness of truth and the fragility of human trust. Both households sought counseling, found ways to integrate the children's understanding as they grew older, and worked tirelessly to rebuild the sense of security that had been shattered. And yet, even as years passed, the memory of that stormy night at Crestspoon Medical Center lingered, a shadow in the lives of all involved, a reminder that love, desperation, and human error can collide with consequences far beyond what anyone could imagine. By the end of the case, there was closure, yes, but it was imperfect, messy, emotional, and irrevocably real. Justice had been served, yet the story would live on, not just in headlines, but in the hearts of those who loved, lost, and ultimately learned that the truth, no matter how long hidden, always finds a way to emerge.